Norma, you are originally from Farmington, Missouri. Is that correct?
Yes.
And you had how many sisters and brothers?
I have 5 sisters and 1 brother.
So you have a family of 11. And you were all raised there in Farmington and went to school in Farmington. Is that correct?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, so during the time you were there, you were graduated from high school in what year?
1940.
All right. 1940. Something really big happened the next year in 1941. We were bombed by the Japanese.
Pearl Harbor.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
And it kind of changed life a whole lot, didn't it?
Indeed it did.
And it really changed yours eventually. Because at that time then, a camp was built in Weingarten, a prisoner of war camp was built there.
Mm-hmm.
And because of that, you met your husband and ended up in Marion, Ohio. Is that correct?
Yes.
Yes. What are your memories of the camp down there? What was the talk whenever that first was going to be open? You had to hear a lot of people talking about it.
Well, there was some talk, but I was 17 years old at that time.
Mm-hmm.
And I was 18 when the camp was built.
Uh-huh.
And I was just out of school, was focused more on what I was going to do with my life. I had a job with the Farmington News.
Oh, okay.
And and I knew that a lot of the boys were getting ready to go to service, and I knew Frank Lang, who ran the jewelry store, and he asked me to come work for him. He said all the boys were going to be called to war, and he says, let me teach you the jewelry business, and he says, now I recommend you to be hired as a manager. Well, I thought this is a good deal, and I was concentrating on that more than anything else. I knew that some of the people that I knew, some of the boys that I knew and was in high school with, were being drafted.
Now your brother was one of them, wasn't he?
Yes.
Stanley.
Yes.
And he went into service in what year? 41? 42?
I think he went in there in 41, yes.
Okay. So at that time, when you were a young girl, about 18 years old, you were very interested in, just like all young girls were, what is my life going to be like in the future? What am I going to do? And you said you were, that Mr. Lane from Gift Chest Jewelers approached you about a job there. So what happened with that?
Well, I took that job. He was drafted, and I got the job.
At Gift Chest Jewelers?
Gift Chest.
And so you became the manager?
Mm-hmm.
How old were you when you became the manager?
I was probably 18 and a half or 19.
That's pretty young to be a manager of a Gift Chest jewelry store. And so you worked there, and your sisters, some of them worked at the theater right next door. Is that correct?
Yes.
When you were working at Gift Chest Jewelers, Norma, the camp Weingarten, the prisoner of war camp in Weingarten, Missouri, just not too far from Farmington, was they had prisoners of war there that were both Japanese and German, correct?
No, there were no German people there.
Oh, all right.
I don't know.
Well, there were for a short while, I believe. They moved them out later.
Oh, okay.
But anyhow, there were a lot of servicemen that were stationed there, because it was a large camp.
Oh,
so
yes.
Yeah. And so through that, your life really changed. You were working at Gift Chest, and how did you meet your husband?
Well, I met him on the street in front of my jewelry store. I was with 2 of my friends. We were getting together. They were home from college. It was in the summertime, and we decided that we would go to the movie. And I had to always change the window display, catch the people. They would stop and look at the window as they would go to the movie. We call them picture shows in those days.
Mm-hmm.
And we were looking at the display that I had put in, and Eleanor Valley and Mary Ruth Moore were with me. And Eleanor says, "Oh, here comes some fellas, some soldiers from the camp." She says, I've dated one of them, Lieutenant Doyle. She says, "They're all officers." Well, they came up and Eleanor introduced us, and they wanted to know what we were up to, and we said, "Well, we were just looking at the window, and then we were going to the movie." And we said, "What are you doing here?" And they said, "Well, we've come in to go to the ball game at Wilson Rozier Park." And they said, "Well, do you want to go to the ballpark with us?" Some team was playing. I think some of the soldiers were playing ball. They had a team, and well, we didn't particularly want to do that. I can't remember what was on, but anyhow, they said, let's go up to the drugstore and have a Coke, and we'll decide what we're going to do. We're going to try to convince you to go to the ballpark." And we girls went out, and so we went to the show. Can't tell you what was playing, but we went to the movie. And I can't remember what else we did. I know that I had to go take the display out and put the diamonds and the watches in the safe for the night.
Mm-hmm.
And I think maybe we went to Smith's Cafe and probably had a cup of coffee.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's what we did. And Eleanor sort of paired off with Lieutenant Doyle, and I was the shortest girl, and Jake was the shortest man, so he just sort of paired with me. And anyhow, they called a cab to take us home, and Jake asked me for a date. The next night there was a dance at the officers' club, and would I like to go?
Okay.
Oh, that sounds like fun, I thought. So I said, all right. So we made arrangements, and I went to the officers' club.
Can you tell us a little bit about the officers' club there at Weingarten? Was that nice, or just very small,
yes,
or what?
Yes, it was quite nice. Now I said that the first night was the dance. I can't remember what. They didn't have a band. They probably had the jukebox.
Uh-huh.
Isn't it strange that you don't remember all of those little details? But anyhow, we had a good time, and to get to camp, not many of the soldiers had cars.
Right. Yes.
And we had to use taxi cabs,
Mm-hmm.
and it was $2.50 from Weingarten to Farmington. So when they came to pick us up, they paid for the cab fare to come in, and then the cab fare to get back to camp.
Yeah.
After they had to pay to come into Catan, then they had to pay to get back, and it was just a different experience, because they were all. You were aware that it was all Army.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember that they had a bar there, and I wasn't a drinker. I probably had a Coke. And but it was exciting. And anyhow, then Jake asked me if I would come back on Sunday night, that they were going to have Italian spaghetti. And I said, it's real good. So I went back. Mary Ruth and George did not, and the other two did not. They didn't have a date then.
Okay.
But
Now, when you said they were going to have an Italian dinner, did some of the prisoners prepare that? Because they were Italian, so some of them had to be good cooks.
At that time, I didn't know who cooked it. All I know is that was the first time that I had real Italian spaghetti.
Okay.
And I didn't know how to eat it. And Lieutenant Pantrelli sat at the table with us, and he says, well, you use a tablespoonful and you twirl it.
Mm-hmm.
But I've been to Europe 2 or 3 times since, and that's not the way they eat it over there.
But it got it done that night, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
That's the way we did it. And it was very good spaghetti, I remember that.
Okay. What did your parents think about your dating an army officer that they didn't know? He was from where? Where was he from originally? Where did he live, his home?
My Jake
Mm-hmm.
lived in Niagara Falls, New York.
Okay. And
And
so,
Lieutenant Pontrelli was from Brooklyn, New York, and I can't remember where George Doyle was from, but later on we visited them in Boulder, Colorado. They came to the hotel. This was after we were married, and they lived in Boulder, and that's where Charlie Gentius and
yes.
Florence Swartz, they had married,
Mm-hmm.
and they had settled in Boulder, Colorado,
Mm-hmm.
and we all got together.
But what did your parents think about you dating this army man, this army officer that, they
Well,
didn't
yeah,
know anything
now
about him?
You just be careful about these army boys now. You hear all these stories, but they were nice. They were nice fellows.
Uh-huh.
They were well behaved, and I felt safe with them. I can remember sitting in the picture show, and I asked Jake what church he went to, and he says, I go to the Catholic Church. And I was Baptist,
Yes.
and I dated a couple of Catholic boys, and in those days your parents didn't, they wanted you to stay in your own church.
Yes.
And I thought, well, here we go again, because I seem to gravitate towards Catholic boys for some reason or another. And but
How long
my
did-
mother liked Lieutenant Jacob,
Okay.
and my little sisters liked him. When
Uh-huh.
he came to the house, he always talked to them, and as we dated, he would bring little presents from the post exchange.
Where were you and what were you doing when you heard Pearl Harbor had been bombed in 1941?
Well, I happened to be in St. Louis that weekend.
Mm-hmm.
I had to go up to the wholesale house to get stock for the store, and I would take the bus, go to St. Louis, and select the merchandise that I thought would sell in the store. And I was at my uncle Tom Barton, my mother's brother, home up in St. Louis. They lived on St. Vincent Street. And we were getting ready to have dinner. And then they broke in with the news that Pearl Harbor had been bombed. And it was just, we just couldn't believe it. Just couldn't believe it. And they were, that was before television, of course.
Sure.
And so we were just glued to the radio. And they would talk about how the people were going down wanting to sign up. They were going downtown. I don't know where they were going, but I can remember that they showed people on the streets. They wanted to go, and everybody was just incensed. We couldn't believe that this was happening. That's just so vivid in me.
Mm-hmm.
I can just remember that so well.
Do you remember, did you know where Pearl Harbor was?
I don't think that I knew where Pearl Harbor was. I
Yes.
just I knew it was in the Hawaiian Islands, what they kept talking about in Hawaii. And I can remember how we all went to the picture show because they had the news reels.
Oh, yes.
And I like to go pick up the newsreels. I'm sort of a news hound. I like to know what's going on in the world. And I wanted to go every time the movie changed because they would have a newsreel. They had a comic. They had a little comic thing first, you know, and they didn't have so many. I don't remember advertisement, but they had a they had a show. We always saw the previews. We always had newsreels, and then there would always be something comedic. And I never wanted to miss that. And I went to the movies a lot to catch the newsreels. And I can remember seeing those pictures. I can just all that black smoke just coming up where they were bombing the ships and everything. It was. I was riveted to the news.
So at the time, whenever Pearl Harbor was bombed and the whole country was just absolutely astounded and frozen and incensed that this had happened. And you were in St. Louis, and you returned to Farmington. And shortly after that, I would think in 42 maybe, your brother enlisted family. Yes. So you had family involved in this. Yes.
Everybody was talking about being drafted.
Yes. Or enlisting. They would either go down and enlist, as you said, or be drafted. So here's all of these hometown boys, many of them your friends that you knew from Farmington, going in to enlist and go off to fight this war. And all of a sudden they hear, in about 1942, I think it was, in 1943 and 42, that there was going to be a prisoner of war camp brought into our area in Weingarten, which is about halfway from Farmington and between St. Genevieve and Farmington. There had to be some concern from people about, well, you know, here we're fighting them and they're going to bring them over here. Why do you think they brought prisoners of war into Missouri to put in a prison?
Well, one of the reasons was that they wanted to isolate them and put them someplace where they wouldn't try to escape. There weren't a lot of railroads. There were no railroads in Weingarten, and they just, you know, the reason that they brought them to the United States was because Churchill told President Roosevelt, that they could not feed all these prisoners that they were catching. Those Italians were in North Africa, and Rommel was there with his group, and the Italians were there, and they wanted to. Churchill said that they couldn't afford to. They didn't have any place to build a camp, and they needed to get them out of Europe. So they wanted to isolate them in an area where they wouldn't try to escape. So, and they talked about they would have thousands that would be coming. That was a big thing. Weingarten was just a little hole in the ground, and Farmington wasn't much bigger.
What was the population at that time? Do you remember?
3,001. We all claim to be the one. Yes.
So do you remember when they started bringing, well, I'm sure they first brought in American troops to be the guards and run the camp down there. Do you remember when they started coming in?
I don't know, but I know they said it was a military police base.
Okay, yes.
Because they would be guarding these prisoners, that they would have units that would be spread over. I've forgotten how many acres this camp enclosed.
I think it was something like 880 acres.
And I know that my dad got a job down there as a guard. You know, just he was a night watchman.
Yes.
He was a night watchman. I remember that. And
they said they had built 340 buildings in that camp. I'm sure some of them, a good part of them, had to be to house our own troops that were there as administrators and guards. And do you remember how that was, anything about that down there, how that was laid out, or what some of the things were they had?
I just, it's rolling country there.
Yes.
And I remember there was the main road, and the sidewalks were wooden. They were wooden sidewalks because it would be muddy, and they didn't make them out of concrete then. But I knew that they said that they had their own septic tanks. They had a sewer. They had a system, and I can remember those Quonset huts, those round things, and they had different. They were in different areas. There were compounds that were called. And they had these towers all the time, real high towers. And the men were up there, the soldiers were up there.
The guard towers, yes.
And there were always a lot of trucks coming and going. And I can remember they would come through town, and you could hear them because they seemed to make a lot of noise. And the fellows would, if they would see anybody on the street, they would wave, and we all would run like, it was a big deal. In those days, this was before air conditioning, and all the businesses had their front doors open. So as those trucks would rumble through, everybody would run to the door and wash them, and of course they would stand on the trucks and holler, oh, they just holler and holler, and of course we're safe standing in our doorways, and so we holler back, we're throwing kisses, and it was fun. It was really something. We'd say, well, I wonder where they're going. And somebody said, well, they work in the farms around here. I can remember I had to go out to Butterfields one time on some business. Can't remember why I went, but it was on business. I out there, and first thing I know, I could tell that all this talking was going on. What are those people doing over there in the corner? There were about 5 or 6 of them, and I decided that I could tell from their clothes that they were soldiers, and I decided, well, those are prisoners, and they were all there to ogle me. Ogle me. What is the word I want to use? They just wanted to see a girl.
And you were a very pretty girl.
I don't know about that, but I got a lot of attention, I'll say that. And I probably waved to them, I'm sure that I did. Because they were friendly, and they were all good looking. They were all good looking guys.
All from Italy. The dark, good looking men from Italy. A lot of the prisoners, what was their attitude mostly? Those that you saw them there and other places, what was the general attitude of the prisoners? Were they unhappy? Were they angry?
Well, I would ask I said, "Do you have any trouble with it?" No, they live their own lives. A lot of the soldiers would try to think of excuses to go into their compounds because they wanted to see what they ate, because they knew that they had their own cooks. The American boys had their own cooks, and the Italians had theirs, and it got so that everybody wanted to go down there to eat in their compounds, and so finally they let them do some cooking for the Americans.
I'm sure some of them were excellent
See,
cooks.
there were a lot of soldiers that were there. It was a military police outfit that ran the camp. Well, there must have been several hundred, because they had to have quarters for them, and they had their own recreation area, and the prisoners had their own areas.
What were some of the other buildings down there that they had? Do you remember?
Well, they had a lot of trucks. They had a theater building, a great big theater building. As I said, they had the dog kennels.
These were the ones that helped patrol. Is that correct?
Yes,
the
well,
dogs?
and then they would be called to other camps too, and I don't know why.
So they had their dogs down there, their police dogs,
Yeah.
they called them probably.
I know that first night that I went down there, I saw, it looked like a train over there. There was the electric lights in the
Watchtowers, guard towers.
Well, no, in the kennels they had lights on the dogs. You know, it looked like there was a train out there. You see, there were the buildings, and evidently they kept lights going, because if anyone tried to escape, things were lit up at night.
Yes.
You know that it was surveillance. But they had a post exchange where you could go in and buy things. The soldiers had their own post exchange where they could buy things, and they were allowed to keep some of their money, and some of it was banked for them. And but I know that some of them sent money back to the people in Italy, because they were eating better in this country than they were in their own country.
Yes, I'm sure that's true.
And they were all pretty happy.
Mm-hmm.
And I knew a couple of officers that came in, and they said, "You ever want to have any work done? You want to have your pictures painted?" Or they do pen and ink, and they do pencil, and they had oil paintings, and they're not allowed to charge any money to do that. I couldn't understand this, because I know I had mine done.
Show us that you have it here, don't you, Norma?
Yes.
And this was done by one of the prisoners at the camp, right?
At the camp.
Then pull it over this way more, Norma. Over towards you. There you go. That was you.
Yes. This was done from a photograph.
Uh-huh.
And it's a very good likeness. It looks just like
And that was done in 1943?
1943 by a Panaccio Alfonso on February the 8th, 1943.
So you have a signed old master.
And it's got Campo something, or I think it's prisoner camp, Italia.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
Italia.
That's lovely.
And I have another one. And the poor boys, they were lonesome. I have a letter here. I'd like to read that one.
All right.
Let me put on my glasses.
What, they got two of them, and it's okay.
This was written July the 31st, 1943. Miss Norma, excuse me, but I am happy to write you because you are a beautiful girl and I will like you to write me. This picture is a remembrance for you and I don't demand money from you, but I prefer cigarettes and one little scissors. Thanks you, T-A-N-K-S, and excuse me if I don't write very well English. I give you my salute and cordiality, your friend, Sergeant Vincencio Moniaci, M-O-N-I-A-C-I. Now we have people in Marion by that name, and they call it Manaci, M-A-N-I-A-C-I.
Was this pretty common that the prisoners wrote or corresponded with people from Farmington, Weingarten, from local people?
Well, I don't know. I never saw any letters from anybody else, but Lieutenant Pontrelli said that they don't get any mail. He says if you want to write a little note,
They weren't getting mail from home, yeah.
Picture, he says they would appreciate that.
Sure.
And then one of them, he thanks me for the
Yeah.
scissors and some cigarettes that I sent.
Yeah.
I just
Yeah,
just
well,
say-
they probably did
And
with
I-
several of the different people in the area.
I didn't want to leave them on. I told this fellow that I had a boyfriend, but he kept writing me letters, and I just saved some. And one of them, after he was down in Louisiana, I guess he missed me so much. And it's quite a love letter, a Latin love letter.
A Latin lover. Well, that's a memory, isn't it? That's a good memory. You know, the thing was, now, what kind of entertainment did they have, or recreation did they have for the prisoners?
Well, they had a ball field. They had and they they had a little band down there that they played and had music.
Did they play sports? Some of them have sports teams.
I imagine that they did.
Yes, yes, yeah.
They had a tennis court up at the officers' club, and they could come up there. Certain they would come up there and they would let them play tennis on the court. And I understand, I didn't know this until I read David Fiedler's book. They even came to Farmington and swam in the swimming pool, in the municipal pool.
Yes, I heard that. So they did have some freedom under guard.
Yes. Oh yes.
Yeah, always under guard,
always
of
under
course.
guard.
Yeah. As well as
and
work.
they wouldn't have a big contingent of them. I mean, they might bring 20 or 15 or 20 of them come at a time.
Yeah. Well, you know, I was just recalling that at first they had planned this camp, Weingarten, for about 3,000 plus prisoners. Eventually they had to enlarge it, and there were 5,800 prisoners of war there. That was bigger than the town of Farmington was at that time, because that was in the 40s.
Right.
Yeah.
They made it was just like a little city down there.
Yes, they did. They had movie theaters. They had a hospital down there too, didn't they?
Yes.
And they had a doctor that was there, that came down there, that stayed there, right?
I remember that doctor often had dinner up at the officers' club, American Officers' Club.
What was it, Dr. Coretti or something like that?
Well, Dr. Coretti was American. He was from St. Louis.
Yes,
He was from St.
yes,
Louis.
I knew that.
But they captured doctors and dentists over there, and so they had to have medical care.
Right, a hospital.
And the government provided all that for them.
Yeah.
And maybe that's why they moved some of the prisoners around. Maybe that's why that Moniaci or Manaci, I don't know how they said it.
What about American wax? Did they have any American wax or nurses there?
Yes, there were nurses there. As a matter of fact, Mancus, Lieutenant Mancus, was from New York. She was in charge of all the social events at the officers' club. Now I don't know whether she did things like that for the Italian prisoners or not, but she was Italian, and she was always at all the functions there at the officers' club, the American officers' club. And I imagine she did things for the others too, but with 3,000 and 5,000 people down there.
Yeah.
They
Plus, you had.
I don't think they had any women prisoners there.
No, but they did have American staff.
Yes.
Wax there and all.
Yes.
So they had well over 120 American stationed there. The soldiers and all stationed there at Wine. That was a large area to have that many people there in some place that basically had what, maybe 600 people in the entire area before. Yeah, quite an influx. You were talking also earlier about, now did they have a chapel down there and where they could go to church?
Yes, they had their chapel, and the Americans had their chapel. It was right across the street from the officers' club, and where the nurses lived. The nurses were living in the Quonset huts right across from the officers' club. And
now the town of Weingarten, Norma, and I'm sure you remember this, the town of Weingarten actually organized a kind of service club and entertainment for the soldiers, not for the prisoners, but for the soldiers, and had, a lot of different things down there for them to do. They did not do that in Farmington, did they?
No.
All right.
Not that I knew anything about.
But they did have a lot of dances down there at Weingarten.
Yes, I don't know whether they danced with one another. I don't know that. And I don't. It's possible that they just let them come up and sit there and. 'Cause the Americans all say, like the pictures that I have there, with all of us sitting at a table. Some of those may have been prisoners that were sitting out at other tables.
Oh, all right. It's possible, yes. Didn't you say that they took some of the prisoners up to the Hill in St. Louis, the Italian community up there? Why did they do that?
Well, they were well behaved. They were so happy to be at Weingarten because they got good food, they had freedom, they weren't, they were treated well. And so they would take some of them to the Hill in St. Louis for special treats to
visit with some of the people, because those are all Italian that lived on the Hill.
And then some of
at
those
that
people
time.
then would come down and visit them, and the Italians are very affable, and they were an affectionate group, and they were
many
well
of them
treated.
were still quite young, weren't they?
Oh,
Many of the prisoners were very young.
Very young.
Yeah. They were pressed, a lot of them were pressed into service when they were like 14, 15 years old, is that correct?
I don't know what time when they were drafted, but see, they fought with the Germans. These prisoners that they had at Weingarten were all from the war in North Africa.
Oh, all right. These prisoners came from the war in North Africa.
Now, they had been fighting probably in Italy.
In Europe,
sometime.
Yeah,
and then
in
later
Europe.
that war, they had battles in North Africa.
All right.
Even Rommel was in North Africa.
Yes. you were talking about that, some of the prisoners got to go up to the hill in St. Louis and visit. But now for the soldiers that were stationed here, a lot of them, an awful lot of them, formed relationships with young women like yourself from Farmington and Weingarten area. Is that correct? They dated you?
No, none of the prisoners were.
No, the soldiers that were stationed there, the officers.
Yes, yes. There were several enlisted men that married Farmington girls. There was Bertha, what was her name? Coker, married Sergeant. What's his name? And he lived there after. What? He made Farmington his home after the war. And Captain McClaskey was a sergeant for a long time, and then he was an American soldier. Had his family. He moved there.
Yes.
He lived in town. He didn't stay on the post at night. He went in, and part of his family are still living in Farmington today. And several of the fellows. There were a couple of marriages that happened to girls over in Flat River. Captain DeBrewer married Jeannie Sutton. Jeannie Sutton got cancer and died not too long after they were married. And, Captain Phillips, who was from Indiana, married Jenny Hink. At that time, Jenny Hink lived in that apartment building above the A&P store. There was just a kitty corner across from the post office. We used to go to parties up there a lot, and Jake had a car because this captain, he was a private or a corporal from Grand Rapids, Michigan, Jimmy Abraham, a wealthy family in Grand Rapids, and they bought him a car, and he was an enlisted man, and he didn't use it a lot, but the family bought it for him. And Jake, being of Lebanese ancestry, Jake sought him out to talk to him, and he says, "I've got a car. Anytime you want a car, why?" He says,
that was a problem down there in Weingarten, wasn't there? Was no transportation.
Yes, and it was $2.50 to take a cab from Weingarten, 14 miles to Farmington. So the transportation was expensive, really.
Sure.
But anyhow, Jake had the use of that car. What did I want to tell you about? So this was when he would bring Captain Pontrelli along. Now he was one that was in those three officers that we first met on the street, you might say, in front of the window, and we introduced him to Eileen McGuire, and they had quite a little romance going. She had a boyfriend who was overseas, but you never knew whether they were going to come back. But we double dated all the time, had a lot of fun. And so we went to all the picture shows and the dances, and we went to St. Louis a couple of times, more than a couple of times. I remember one time a bunch of us went to the Chase. And I think, no, this picture here.
Yes.
This is. I'm sure that was at Weingarten.
Yes.
But I have one I know that's in the. Yes, the one we went to the Chase.
Hold that one over this way more. That was at the Officers Club. Hold it up higher. There you go. Yeah, that's a good picture. You were on the extreme left, right? Extreme left is where you were located, next to Lieutenant Jacobs. Yes.
And this is Eileen McGuire. Pontrelli was from Brooklyn, New York. He was a college professor at St. Joseph's College. This is This is Captain Correnti from.
Bring the picture back over this way because you're getting a lot of glare on.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And hold it up a little bit straight.
And Mary Lou Correnti, the last I heard, was living. They built a cottage up at tear the lock.
Uh-huh.
But he died, and Mary was living there. But
Yeah. Yeah.
and Eileen McGuire married her other boyfriend. Had her the one that she was
Yes.
betrothed to
Yeah.
before he went overseas, and she dated Larry.
Yeah. So there were a lot of romances.
There were a lot of romances.
Yeah.
And, we had the car. We had the car.
Uh-huh.
And when Captain Phillips got married, he and Jenny wanted to leave on their honeymoon, and so Jake borrowed the car, and Jake and I drove to Poplar Bluff for them to catch a train to go on their honeymoon. And I remember.
So you and Jake by this time were pretty serious. Is that correct?
Well, yes.
And you had kind of given up any other boyfriends you had locally, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
He said.
Yeah, and so you were just.
I had a friend came back to town. I had a date with him. I wasn't going steady with Jake, and we had a date. And Jake says, "I hear that you were with a soldier at Texaco Town for dinner with somebody." Somebody told me, and I said, "Well, yes." I said, "He's a local boy," and I said he wanted to go out for dinner. And we went to Texaco Town. Well,
Where was Texaco Town?
Well, that was over near Deloge.
Okay.
It was a filling station, and they had a dining room there.
All right.
And it was quite a hot spot.
Okay.
And so he says, "Well, I want you for my girlfriend, my steady." He says, "Well, you go steady." And he says, "I never told a girl that I loved her before." And he says, "I love you, and I don't want you dating anybody else."
So
I
did
said,
you
"Okay."
agree?
So I didn't.
Yes. And that was when in
But
44?
at one time, one of the soldiers down there, his name was Congezio Silverio. He was from Philadelphia. He was a gardener. He was a Italian prisoner, and he was a gardener for some wealthy people in Philadelphia. And so he was into the jewelry store on business or something, and he asked me for a date. And he says, "I'd like to go to St. Louis." He says, "We can take a bus up to St. Louis." And he says, "I'm going to go to the." Was there a Crystal Ballroom in St. Louis? Yeah.
Crystal Palace, I think, something
Palace.
like
He
that.
says,
yeah.
"Let's go up." He says, "I'd like to go to." Gee, he was a good looking guy. Had a smile like Will Rogers. He was a handsome dude and a good dancer. My uncle Tom Barton happened to be in Farmington that Saturday, and he was going back. Anyhow, we went to St. Louis with Uncle Tom, and we went to the palace, and then we came back to Farmington later that night. But it was the ballroom, and that was the only date that I had with him. And Jake, I can't remember if I told him that I went up there. I think that was before I told him that I would be steady. But I did have a date with one enlisted man.
So.
Oh, and another interesting one was Dubit. What was the name of that Dubit girl? Her father had a big job out at the
Elwyn.
Elwyn Dubit. This Sergeant Mesky wanted a ring. He was a good-looking guy. I don't know where he was from, but he came in to buy a ring, and he wanted to give her an emerald.
Oh my!
And I had never sold an emerald before, so I got in touch with the office and asked them if they could send me a couple of samples. She said he wanted the emerald cut, long.
Mm-hmm.
It was oblong, and he wanted 2 diamonds on either side. And they sent 2 or 3 rings down, and he selected selected a ring. It was a nice, and I made a commission on everything that I sold, so it was nice to sell an
Did he
emerald
marry
stone.
her?
And they married, but then later on they split after the war was over. I don't know how long it was for. I don't know, but I know that they did get married.
All right.
But the marriage did not last.
Yeah. So now you are now going steady with your lieutenant, and I understand then that he made a special production out of giving you your engagement ring. Is that correct?
Yes.
Where did you go to? Where did he take you to give you that?
Well, Larry was dating Eileen, and I was dating Jake, and we had the use of Jimmy Abraham's car. And the kids, the boys wanted to see Lake of the Ozarks. They'd heard Lake of the Ozarks. He says, we would like to take you girls over. He says, we'll go and spend a night over at Lake. Says they've got nice accommodations over there. And he says, Larry and I'll stay together, and you and Eileen can stay together. And he said, there's a lodge over there. They've got good food. And he says, we'll get arrangements. And I said, well, okay, let's go. And I know that I went home and I told my mother that I was going to go on a trip. And I'd never gone any place with anybody, done anything like that before. And these were in the old times when girls were virgins. And so anyhow, we made all the arrangements, and we went over, and we were at the nightclub within the lodge there, the Arrowhead Lodge at Lake of the Ozarks. And Jake said we'd eaten, and by this time it's dark. I've got a picture here.
Yes.
That I'll tell about that later. But it was nighttime. And Jake says, let's take a walk and go down to the dam. And it wasn't too far. I'm in high heels and I'm all dressed up. But we walked down, and we were at the entrance to that dam as you go across. And Jake told me that he loved me, and he says, will you marry me? Got down on the seat. He said, will you marry me? He says, here it is. He has the ring in his pocket in this picture. Lake of the Ozarks on May the 12th, 1945. Jake has a diamond ring in his pocket. He proposed to me that evening and gave me the ring.
Oh.
But he got down on his knee. He says, I love you, and I want you to be, I never forget, he says, and I love you, and I want you to be the mother of my children. Sue says to me, well, what happened? She says, you had only one. I said, I was lucky to get him. But anyhow, so we go back up to the lodge. We walk in. Here was the ring. And I said, well, do you notice anything? Well, yes. What's going on? There's a sparkle in your eyes, both of you. What's wrong? Well, I went like this, and I said, do you notice anything? Oh, a diamond. Yeah. And so Jake says, I took her down to the dam, and if she said was going to tell me no, he says I could push her over the dam. But it was a nice.
What was your parents' and your family's reaction when you came home?
I couldn't wait till I got home, and Jake, I really can't remember whether he told me. I don't think he did. When we got back home, I told Mom, I said, Jake gave me the ring. She says, we knew all about it. When you wanted to go over there, and he had already asked for your hand in marriage with your dad, and we said okay. So they knew that he was going to give me a ring on that trip, because I said we're going to go over there. We'll be good. Eileen and I will be staying in the same room, and they will be staying in a room, and so and she didn't make many comment, but she knew then that he was going to give me the ring.
How wonderful. Now, he was Catholic.
Yes.
You were Baptist.
Yes.
So you converted, is that correct?
Yes. Jake's sister was, Jake was Catholic. There are a lot of people from Lebanon. There are a lot of Christians in Lebanon, and his folks were both born in Lebanon. His dad came to this country when he was 19 and married his mother. She came over here too. She was living in France at that time. She was was teaching French. She spoke French. She was Lebanese, and let's see, now where was I going with that?
His sister.
Oh, and Jake had a sister. And Jake's mother died when he was 11 years old, and his father sent him to a Catholic boarding school, Sisters of St. Francis, Penance and Charity, out of Niagara Falls. Put him in this boarding school because he couldn't take care of the 3 kids. The girl was the oldest. She was 14, and then there was Phil, and Jake was 11. And so he put them in that boarding school, and they went to school there all the time. And later they went to St. Bonaventure. But Sister Longina joined the sisterhood while she was there. And by this time, by the time he's proposed to me, she is fully. She was a novitiate up there. She was full-blown Catholic sister, and she was a Mother Superior. She was the youngest Mother Superior in the United States when she was in her 30s. She ended up in Columbus, Ohio. But anyhow, I knew that it would be best to be of the same faith.
Mm-hmm.
I knew the Catholics didn't change. I knew that my mother would not be too happy. As a matter of fact, when I said I was going to take some instructions in the church, the Baptist minister came into the jewelry store and tried to dissuade me from going into the Catholic Church. But I knew that she was praying for me, and it seemed like some of the boys that I dated were Catholic, and it just seems like I'm supposed to be Catholic, I guess. And I knew she would be praying for me, and I called her one of my guardian angels, and she was very happy. And so I took instructions in the church, and we were married in the church. Now this was on May the 13th, 1945, and I took instructions.
Hold it there. You got this beautiful engagement ring. How did Jacob know what kind of a ring you would like?
I understand that he talked to Lorraine, and I told Lorraine that if I ever got an engagement ring, what I wanted was a platinum.
Yeah.
And so I said, he went to St. Louis, went to the wholesale house where Gift Chest bought all of their merchandise. They own their own wholesale house, and so they bought the ring. And Mr. Sturhan said that that he would run it through the jewelry store, the sale, because it would be charged for them that went through there. So I said I ended up getting a commission on my engagement ring.
Did you know at the time that was going to be your engagement ring? whenever you got the order in, did you know that was your engagement ring when you got it at the store?
Oh, Jake brought it back.
Oh, he brought it
He brought
back.
from-
Okay. Now, who was Lorraine that he told, that you told what you wanted and that he talked to? Who's Lorraine? Your sister?
Lorraine was working for me in the store.
And she was
And
your
at some-
sister?
Yes.
Yeah,
And
okay,
And
yeah.
at some time, he had time to ask her what. He probably told her he was going to give me a ring, and what would
Yeah.
she want?
Okay. All right. Very good. But it's a beautiful ring and you still wear it.
Still wear it.
Yeah, isn't that wonderful? So now you're making plans for your wedding. And you said you had a cousin that also married a young man from down
Well,
there?
yes, when we were talking about weddings and so forth, I mean, my cousin, Virginia Overall, met Sergeant Victor Moffo from over in eastern Ohio, Tiltonsville.
Uh-huh.
And he was a baker, cook and baker at the at the camp. There's another I forgot to mention him. But anyhow, of course I was very excited about this, and Jake insisted that we send out announcemements that we were engaged. I guess that was the way they did it in their family. And so we got some things printed and said that Mr. and Mrs. Stanley Overall announced engagement. But we didn't make any plans to get married because, see, the war was still going on, and it was going like crazy over in the Pacific.
Right.
And he didn't know but what maybe he might have to go over there. It was, and you see, the war ended really in the early part of May in Europe. And so he says we won't get married until the war is over, and then we'll know what we're going to do.
Now he took you to New York though to meet
So
his
he took me to
parents.
Niagara Falls to meet his dad and his brother and his sister, and
What was your reaction
Yeah,
to what did they think about him getting married? Had they gotten some warning about this ahead of time?
Yes. Oh, when I went, we took the train up from St. Louis, and several members of the family were there to meet us at the train. So I had the royal welcome, and they had heard a lot about me and so forth, and I had heard a lot about them, and I liked all of them. They were nice and friendly and so forth. But anyhow, we didn't make any plans until we knew what was going to happen next. So first thing you know, they dropped the bomb in Hiroshima. I went down to the camp that day, and I remember Jake saying, "They've dropped that bomb, and it was just a disaster. All these people killed." Jake said, "They will surrender. This war is going to be over." And he says, "We ought to begin to make some plans." And he says, I know we're downsizing here at the camp." So 2 days later, they dropped the second bomb, and Jake says, "This is it. It's going to be over. Let's set a date." He says, "and we can have the wedding at the church if we make it a time for them, because you had to engage the church and so forth." And I missed the big celebration in Farmington. They had a big celebration
in August
Farmington because I was at camp, and then they announced that the Japanese had surrendered.
In August.
And so we decided, well, we'll get married as quick as we can, because it was temporarily thought that they would close the camp, that it would be closed probably by 1st of November, and it was. So we got into started making the plans, and I had all of my sisters in the wedding. They were
You were married at St.
at
Joseph
St.
Catholic
Joseph's
Church.
Catholic Church on October the 13th, 1945. And Lorraine was my maid of honor. She wasn't married, maid of honor. And Maxine was a bridesmaid. Dorothy was a bridesmaid. Margaret was This is a flower girl. No,
Yeah.
flower girl. And Elma was the ring bearer.
Oh my.
And we left on our honeymoon, and I can remember.
Do you have a picture of your wedding? Do you have a picture of your wedding?
Yes,
Yes.
yes. I
Yeah.
remember that.
I was turning it around, so yeah, that's beautiful. Where did you get your gown?
Famous bar. In St.
Famous
Louis.
bar.
Mom went
Okay.
to St. Louis with me. And,
Yes. Yes.
Just notice the difference. At that time, girls were still all covered, and you had long sleeves. I had pointed sleeves that came down over the hand.
To the point over the
But,
hand.
And Uncle Bob Galt was the one that took care of all of the flowers. He was it doesn't make a difference where he worked. But he was in charge of the floral department at State Hospital.
Mhm.
He was their flower expert.
Mhm.
He made all the bouquets. And Fielding McCormick, a local
Of course.
man, I was one of Fielding McCormick's girls. He liked to talk about his girls. And he says, I'll take care of the reception for you. So he planned the canopies. So we weren't going to have a dinner because
Right.
they didn't have enough personnel. And he ordered the wine. He says, you got to have wine. And they went down to the wine store there in Weingarten and bought the wine. And we had the reception at the Officers Club.
In Weingarten.
And Fielding decorated the mantle there and so forth. And then we went to we wanted to go to Mackinac Island for honeymoon. But
Show
they
us the
were
tray that they gave you from down there.
What was what?
They gave you a gift from the Officers Club?
Oh yes, that's another thing. We had so many weddings at Weingarten that the officers always gave a sterling silver bread tray. And I mean it's heavy. It's not.
Yes.
It wasn't
Show
a
it
cheap
so we
thing.
can see it.
You turn it over, and what does it read? How does it read? What's written?
What does it say? It says for Lieutenant and Mrs. George Jacob. Gives the date. From the officers. I need my glasses. Well, from the officers to Camp Weingarten, October the 13th, 1945.
Yes.
And everyone got, and I sold a lot of these, and I not only got a kiss from my wedding ring, but I got a commission on my, not only on all the other officers, but I got one for myself. The paycheck was good that week. And he knew Amanda Giesing,
Yes.
who always made the birthday cake, or made wedding cakes. So she made the wedding cake. Now, these are all characters long gone now. And
Where?
so we went on our honeymoon, and when we came back, it was decided that while we were gone, that they were getting everybody moved out, and Jake says we closed. He says I put the key and the lock at the gate to the camp, and he says and I closed up the camp on November the 1st. And the next day he was sent to Fort Leonard Wood, and he was over there for several months. He came home on the weekends, but he closed the camp on November the 1st.
She already told us that. Okay.
Ask about the photos.
And then
Photos.
when we were
The past.
we bought a car,
Oh, the host.
we bought a car by this time, and we drove to Fort Dix, New Jersey, and he was mustered out, and they awarded him his captaincy at that time. Then
Who took your wedding pictures?
Floyd Davis had Davis Music Store and photography shop. Went there and had her pictures taken.
So I think it's very interesting that your husband then, Lieutenant, was he still a first lieutenant, or had he been promoted to captain at that time?
He got his promotion when he was as he was discharged.
Okay, so he was captain at that time, and he was the last one to leave the camp. And he was.
When we were married, they all of his brother came from Niagara Falls and was his best man. He had not gone to service, and all the other attendants were officers at Weingarten.
Oh, how nice! That he had become good
we would
friends.
have had movies, but Captain, I can't think of his name, from Gates Mills, Ohio, dropped his camera as he was getting ready, taking it out of the trunk of the car, and shattered his movie camera. But fortunately, we had also asked for some still pictures, so we have pictures taken during the wedding, still pictures coming down the aisle. But I was disappointed, and
Yes.
but then everybody was gone after this. Was the 13th.
Yeah.
They gave us only 10 days off for a honeymoon, and then it was just bang, 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 and
It was all over. So how did you decide that you were going to live in Ohio?
well, I didn't want to go to New. It's best not to be too close to all of your relatives, and their George was just the apple of their eye. He was one of the babies of cousins and everybody. And I knew they'd all be telling me what to do and all that, and I wasn't used to having anybody telling me what to do. And he says, I don't see anything in Farmington for us. And he says, why don't we get halfway? And we kind of checked out some of the states, and the tax base was good here. The taxes were kind of high in Indiana. He says, the environment is good in Ohio. Let's try to get in Ohio. So we did get a little closer to Niagara Falls than we did Farmington, but that's all right.
That's all right.
But this was before interstates, and it was a long trip. But we bought a car by then. But when he was at Fort Leonard Wood, we bought a car. And
So you've been living. How long were you married before he passed away?
we were married. He passed away in 44 years. Another thing here, I have a candy dish, Ruby. We had the kids. By this time, Dean is married, Dean and Sue, and they had a surprise. They had a sort of a surprise party, a 40th anniversary party, and Jake was not well at that time, and Andy Theron Andre Captain Andre from Wadsworth, Ohio. Ran a Wright's department store in Wadsworth, and we visited back and forth with one another.
Now, had he been at Weingarten?
And he had been
also?
at Weingarten. He ran the Post Exchange, and we kept up with them. They were just a real nice couple. And he came and brought me that dish, the Ruby.
The Ruby dish.
Candy dish.
Yes.
And another interesting thing, Andy got. Laverne died shortly after that, and then Andy got sick and he died, and they had requested that Dean be a pallbearer. So my son was a pallbearer at Captain Andre's funeral.
Okay, how nice. Dean was your oldest, is that right? Is your oldest?
He was our only son.
Yeah.
And Dean was 24 when he was married, I guess, probably 26 maybe. But Jake and I were married 44 years. We celebrated our 44th.
And Katie was
40th anniversary.
Katie was born when?
And Dean wasn't born until 1961, February 61. We'd been married 14 years when we had.
And then Katie
finally got Dean. We ended up in Cleveland, and Jake decided that he was going to. would be a salesman. And
he's your granddaughter. I'm sorry.
he couldn't find, he wanted to be a
What's her
manufacturer's
daughter's name?
representative, but he never had any experience in selling. So every time he would try to get something, he said, we haven't had experience in selling.
Uh-huh.
So he saw something that sounded enticing. They didn't tell him exactly what it was. It turned out it was a sonotone hearing aid company.
Mm-hmm.
And so they hired him, and he learned to be an audiologist. And they said, if you do well here in Cleveland, well, we're going to open some other satellite offices.
Mm-hmm.
And so after 6 months, they said, we come to Marion and open an office here. We had a chance to open one either in Findlay or in Marion, because Marion was on the railroad. And I remembered when we took the trip to go meet the folks, that we went to a place called Marion, Ohio, and I can remember it. And I thought, well, now, I could catch a train. The train stopped here. We were crossroads here for several lines. The Southwestern went from here to New York City. So we decided on that we would take Marion because there would be transportation. Because this was when there was, the main highway between Ohio and St. Louis was Route 40.
Mm-hmm. And you lived here for how many years now? Have you lived here in Marion?
We've lived here since 1949. We came here in January of 47, I say.
Yeah.
Came here in January of 47. It was snowy night. Don't forget it. And we did real well. We opened an office, and then later we opened one in Mansfield and one in Lima, Ohio. And we were in the hearing aid business for 16 years. And then we sold out, and Jake decided he wanted to do something else.
Mm-hmm.
He wanted to deal with more younger people, he said. And he got in touch with somebody, heard about us, that we were, he said, my husband had an eye for business. And he says, this town needs another bowling center, because we had only 2 in town, and you couldn't even get an open lane for any fun games even until midnight. So somebody heard that he was looking, and we were all looking at the same property to buy some property south of town. And those people got in touch with us through one of our hearing aid customers, and they put us in touch with them, and they called us, and we formed a corporation, and Jake ran it, and there were other investors in Dayton, and we ended up owning the whole thing.
Norma, it's amazing. All of this started because the Weingarten prisoner of war camp was opened.
If there hadn't been a war, I would never.
You would never have married.
Getting back to the prisoners and how they entertained themselves, they had a lot of recreational programs. They had ping pong tournaments among themselves, and they could come up to, some of them could come up to the officers' club and use the tennis courts. But a lot of them were good at ping pong. But there were many of them that were quite talented artistically, and they would work through Lieutenant Pontrelli, and he was the gold. I never met any of them, but one of them, Larry, took a photograph down, and he says, give me one of your recent photographs, a colored one. And so I gave him this. He says, I'll take this down and I'll present it to a couple of the artists. And he says, I says, well, what will they charge me? He says, well, they can't charge anything, but they can take gifts. And
turn that around a little bit so we
move it over
better
there.
angle.
There, that's better.
There, that's good.
Okay, good. Fine.
So,
how old were you when that was painted, or the photograph was taken?
probably 20.
Okay. Yeah.
And then so the fellow did that. And then there was another one that was good with pencil sketching. He took the same picture, and he made this pencil sketch.
Mm-hmm.
That's all. That's just with plain lead pencil.
Yeah.
And this was signed by Vincent Manesi.
Mm-hmm.
in 19.
What other things? What other crafts did they do? Were
Oh, they were quite adept with leather, and they made watch bands. They tooled, made billfolds. They had access to materials to work with. So they had, and then they repaired shoes down there. They had shoemakers, and
now they had horses down there. Did they do any?
well, they had those to patrol between all of the guardhouses.
They didn't do any.
If anybody ran off, why they would chase them with the horses.
Did that happen very often?
I don't. There was only one fellow that tried, and they got him before he really got on the train. And they had 4 or 5 people that committed suicide. They just couldn't handle being away from home. And they all complained about how they couldn't get any mail. One of these fellows wrote a letter to me, and he said he wanted me to be his girlfriend. He hadn't had any letters from home in months, months and months. And he was in need of a friend, and would I be his friend?
Yes. Well, and he didn't know what had happened to his family either.
No.
Because there was so much fighting in Italy.
And it was very tough in Italy during the war. They sacrificed over there because they were in the middle of the war, and they were trying to feed the local people, and prisoners worked for 10 cents a day. 10 cents a day, and they would save enough money, and they could send it over, so they helped to feed their
The prisoners would send money back to their families.
And now when they worked in the fields, they made $1 a day. So they could send some money, and they were happy, and they were given the same food that the Americans ate. They had a lot more spaghetti, but they would want their spaghetti a lot.
Sure.
But they said that they were well fed and they were treated well, and didn't have anything to worry about. But they did. 5 of them did commit suicide, and they had a nice burial spot there. I've got a picture.
They
of
had
them,
their own cemetery, didn't they?
They had
there?
a little cemetery, and they put rocks all around, and so forth. And when the war was over, and they had to completely put the land back in the way it was before the camp was built, and they disinterred those prisoners, and they shipped them back to Italy.
Really?
Yes. Yes. And so the government came in there right after the war, and they let people buy their property back if they wanted to, and they had to take up all the tile that they'd buried for the sewers and all of that. They had to. I was back there several years later, and the only visible signs at that time
The guard towers.
was the fireplace at the officers' club. They left that. They had a beautiful fireplace, and today, if you go down there, they have some steps that lead up, and you can go up to it. There's a new house built right on, and this thing is in the backyard. So if you go down there, you can go up to the door, and they'll let you come up and walk around the fence. And people, up until I don't know how long ago, would come back there and see people that had been in service. Because they came from all over. I remember one day we'd been here in Marion about 3 or 4 years, and Jake was downtown in a restaurant, and this guy came up to me and he says, "I know you, Camp Weingarten. I was there." Jake, you remember Jake?
You know, I have heard, well, I know they had a lot of guard towers down, at Weingarten.
And they sort of put certain people in certain camps.
Sure.
Those that could that they had some that were sort of still sympathizers with Italy. They were in a different compound, and they weren't permitted to go to the swimming pool and to do all these various things, because there were some that were still a little loyal.
Yes.
To,
yes. I had heard though
fascists.
that the guards in the guard tower did not carry ammunition in their guns.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yes. Well, they said that what had happened, and none of the prisoners knew that, fortunately, but what happened was that one of the guards accidentally shot himself in the hand or the foot with his gun, so they decided, well, that was enough of that, and they just took everybody's ammunition away from them.
Well, I know when Jake had to take this doctor, he was repatriated, and they took him back to New York. Jake had to carry a gun, and he was a doctor. It was an officer. I've forgotten what his rank was. And then he had another prisoner that he had to take back to a camp in upstate New York. And Jake said I had to have the pistol strapped to me. And he says, I didn't like the idea of having that. He says they were bigger than he was, so they could have taken it away from him. But he said he had to have the pistol.
Well, they probably had let him have ammunition in his gun then, since he had a prisoner with
I guess
him.
if they decided to take off, well, he was supposed to stop them.
Yeah. So he was a first lieutenant while
but when he was drafted, he was first class, and he was down in several camps down south, private first class, and had the rifle training. He had the rifleman's badge, so
yeah,
he was supposed to be a good sharpshooter.
Yeah. So he ended up then as a captain.
He went to Fort Hampton Woods. He was ready to be sent overseas. This is an interesting story, and he was at Hampton Roads, Virginia, being ready to be shipped out as an infantryman. And a captain came in, and they were all sitting around, and he says, I need somebody who can type. Can anybody type? And Jake said, we all heard that you don't ever volunteer to do anything in the Army. You don't know anything, you can't do anything. And he says, surely somebody in here can type. And so Jake puts up his hand and says, I can. He says, come with me.
And that's how he came to end up here in Farmington, and how you met him. And
second lieutenant. And when he came to Weingarten, he was the first lieutenant, so he was one of the first officers there, and he was the one that closed the camp up.
Isn't that amazing?
So he spent his whole career there. He often wished that he could have had some experience overseas. He had never been to Europe, and his ancestors having come from Lebanon on the Mediterranean, he was hoping that he could get over there and look at his folks' homeland.
Yeah. Probably wouldn't have been at all like his folks had
but
remembered it. Yeah.
After he died, I did a lot of traveling after that.
Yeah.
Made several trips to Europe and several cruises. But in the bowling business, it was a 7-day-a-week job, and we did take a month every year and went to all the conventions, and we went to Hawaii 2 or 3 times, to New York several times, Toronto, Las Vegas many times, Reno, the big hotels down in Columbus. For 18 years we did a lot of traveling and stayed at nice hotels. And
Norma, you have so much information about Weingarten, and I know that you have a tremendous collection of memorabilia from that time, and it's just amazing. You also were one of the contributors to the book that was written called The Enemy Among Us, that was written by David Fiedler, about all of the not concentration camps, but all of the prisoner of war internment camps in Missouri. And you contributed a lot of information and pictures to this book, did you not?
Even my wedding picture made it. I never met him, but we talked on the telephone numerous times. And I put him in touch with a lot of people. And so there are a lot of names of people who were Weingarten. And his, what do you call it, the concordance at the back of the book, all these people, their names were in there.
Mhm.
And I sent him several photographs that I had, and he gave me credit, Norma overall Jacob, but this time my husband's dead. And so he gave me credit for all the pictures that I gave to him.
So you're going to go down in history in this book of Weingarten, and which really is a big part of the history of your life.
Well, yes.
And of your son, Dean, of course, and your grandchild. And so, you're just really connected still.
Yes, I am.
And so what will you do with all of this memorabilia from your past?
Well,
I mean, it's really quite an historic collection you have.
My son is interested in my past, and we were able to send him to Notre Dame, to the university, and when he went over for orientation, this priest was telling them all about the campus and so forth, and he said, you wouldn't know this, but he says after the war, Notre Dame opened their campus to soldiers that came back, got free educations, and he says we housed the women, many of them were married and had kids, and we got Quonset huts from army posts. He says, and the army posts here came from, he says, a little town in Missouri, a little place you wouldn't know anything about it. He says, a camp called Camp Weingarten. And Dean says, he put his hand up and he says, my dad was an officer at that camp. And of course the guy was real excited about the whole thing.
Yes.
And later on, I went over to, when I made a visit to Notre Dame, I got to meet Father Ted Hesburgh. And I've never met Father Hesburgh. Was president of Notre Dame University for 34 years. He posed for pictures with Doris Jean and her daughter and myself. My husband was already gone, but Dean got a big kick out of it because I got into Father Hesburgh's apartment, and Hesburgh was just amazed, the smallest of the world, and here
that there would be a
he got
connection.
to tell me about how he was the chaplain at Vettville. He wasn't president of the university at that time.
Yes.
He was the chaplain over there.
Isn't it amazing how your son all of a sudden was able to hear the words Weingarten Camp while he's at Notre Dame University. So it's a very small world anymore, and it seems like things keep coming back to connect us to the past. And you've certainly had an interesting life and an interesting past because of all of that in your great
I've been
memories.
blessed. I've had a good life, a happy life, happy marriage. I've got a wonderful son.
And
his
six
wife
wonderful.
is great, and I've got two grandchildren that are doing real well. One's on a job over in China right now. He's a fire engineer. He got his education at the University of Maryland.
There are 5 of the 6 overall sisters. We have the 2 in the very front, Lorene and Norma, are the ones that have had experience at Weingarten. Lorene, tell us about your time of being employed there.
I was employed at the Camp Weingarten for probably 2 months. I was employed there as a typist through the civil service examination, and I worked in the engineering department, and Captain Adams was my sponsor, and I've done mostly typing and other duties as necessary. Maybe I done filing also. And one thing I remember about Camp Weingarten, I did get to get a tour of it, and I remember passing the prisoners' camp where they lived, and they were in little houses, and I thought they were very crude. And as we drove by, why they would wave to us, and I got to tour other of the other buildings that were built. So my time there was really just very limited. And that's just about all I can remember being at Camp Weingarten.
Well, it had a very important place in the lives of many people in this area, particularly, of course, Norma. But now these are the sisters. I want you to say your names, starting with Norma.
Norma.
And I'm Laureen.
I'm Margaret. I'm Maxine. Elma.
And Doris is the one who's not with us today. But these are the 6 overall girls. We have the 5 of the 6 overall girls here. And this is the members of the wedding party. Norma, now you have a gift in your hand. Can you show us what that is and tell us about it?
This was a set of the Syracuse china that they used in the officers' club. And this was all given to me by Lieutenant Pontrelli. He couldn't get into town to get me a wedding gift, and so these are they're very heavy, and so they had an auction when they were closing up the camp. They sold the dishes, and so he bought me a set of 8 of these, 8 cups, 8 saucers, the salad plates, some wine glasses, some glass dishes, a whole bunch of stuff that we used at the officers' club.
And you've kept them all of these
and
years.
I've kept them all these years. I started housekeeping with this when we first got married. When my son got married, they used them for about a year before because they got a lot of nice Haviland stuff, but they didn't want to use that for every day. So I said, I've got the Weingarten dishes. So they used them. And I'm going to pass them off to my granddaughter and my grandson when they get married. I went to the basement and dug these up.
They'll become the family heirloom,
Yes,
right? Yes, the Weingarten family heirlooms. Elma, show us the picture of the wedding party. Okay, let me get over here and pull in. Okay, there are the 6 overall girls, all in their finery. And you were all so pretty, and you looked beautiful, Norma. You said you bought your wedding dress at Famous. And who made the dresses for all of the bridesmaids?
Marguerite Ellis.
Okay.
From Farmington.
And everybody had on little heads dresses of some kind. Okay, now I'm going to ask Elma to move back, and you're going to tell me who was who in the wedding party. Let's start with the maid of honor.
This is me.
Yes,
Laureen.
that's you.
I was the maid of honor, Laureen.
Uh-huh. And?
I'm Maxine, and I was a bridesmaid.
Uh-huh. And there was another bridesmaid that was Doris. And then who were you?
Margaret,
Yes.
and I was a flower girl.
Uh-huh.
And I'm Elma, and I was the ring bearer.
And the ring bearer is now taller than any of them, isn't she? But they're all still together after the wedding. And so, some things just never change.
My name is Dean Jacob, and although I was born in Ohio in 1961, I have a very direct connection to Camp Weingarten, which was the prisoner of war camp for Italian prisoners. It was located near the small town of Farmington, Missouri, in the foothills of the Ozarks. My father, Captain George Jacob, was from Niagara Falls, New York, but was stationed at Camp Weingarten during World War II. And of course, the soldiers and the officers would go to the nearest town nearby for their entertainment and to have some R&R. And that's where my mother, Norma Overall, lived in 1941 through 45. And on one of the trips into town, my dad met my mother, and the rest is, as they say, was history. And so as a result of that meeting, here I sit today. So some of these items that are here to the left of me are my father's campaign medals and dog tags, and a photograph of my dad and the U.S. flag that was presented to my mother when my father died, and some little mementos in a shadow box there. A picture of my dad and mother on the porch steps of my mother's house on North Jackson Street in Farmington, Missouri, on the day of their wedding, and a couple of other items, his captain's bars and his glasses and a few mementos. And I've kept his old wallet, and this was his daily prayer book that he had while he was in service. Then there's a further connection later on for myself. Years later, when I went and attended the University of Notre Dame, I was listening to a history professor there, and the history professor was talking about the history of Notre Dame and the campus. And my ears perked up when he said that shortly after World War II, there was a lack of housing for all of the GIs who were coming back to campus, and so they needed extra housing. And some of the housing and the Quonset huts that they used that were located on the campus at Notre Dame in 1946, came from a small prisoner of war camp located in Weingarten, Missouri. And so I, of course, my ears perked up, and I talked to the professor later on to learn a little bit more about that. So Weingarten has certainly near and dear to my heart, and has crossed my paths a couple times in my life. And years later, of course, as I've gone back and visited family in Farmington, we've gone up to Weingarten and seen what remains of it. Last time I was there, I remember still seeing the fireplace and the chimney, and where I think the tennis courts used to be that the officers would use, and a little bit of the foundations for some of the different buildings that were located there.